Marcus Chen stood at Heathrow Airport's arrival terminal, his designer sunglasses perched on his nose despite being indoors. At 32, he had already made his fortune in Silicon Valley's tech industry, and it showed in every aspect of his appearance, from his $1,000 leather shoes to his perfectly tailored suit. But what stood out most wasn't his expensive attire. It was the unmistakable air of arrogance that surrounded him like an invisible cloud. London, prepared to be amazed, he muttered to himself, pulling out his latest iPhone to start recording. His social media followers had grown to 500,000 in the past year, all thanks to his provocative prank videos and what he called reality checks for service workers worldwide. The customs officer at the counter watched him approach, already noting his demeanor with a slight frown. "Purpose of visit, sir?" she asked professionally. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "Tourism, obviously. And maybe teaching you Brits a thing or two about modern efficiency." He smirked, making sure his phone captured the officer's reaction. The customs officer, Sarah Mills, had dealt with countless difficult tourists in her 15 years of service, but something about Marcus's attitude made her pause. She took her time reviewing his documents, deliberately slower than usual. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked loudly, making sure other travelers could hear him. In America, this would have taken 30 seconds. I guess everything really is slower in the UK. Sarah maintained her composure, stamped his passport, and said quietly, "Welcome to the United Kingdom, Mr. Chen. Do remember that you're a guest in our country." Marcus grabbed his passport and walked away, already uploading his first content to his social media accounts. Day one in London, and already dealing with their infamous bureaucracy, he narrated into his phone. "Just wait until they see what I have planned." His taxi ride into central London became another opportunity for his performative behavior. He complained about driving on the wrong side of the road, criticized the historic buildings for looking old and run down, and made sure to mention at least 3 times that everything was better in Silicon Valley. The taxi driver, an elderly gentleman named George who had lived in London his entire life, simply turned up his radio slightly, drowning out Marcus's running commentary. Arriving at his 5-star hotel near Buckingham Palace, Marcus made sure to find fault with everything. He demanded to speak to the manager about the small size of his luxury suite, complained that the complimentary champagne wasn't the brand he preferred, and insisted that his room be changed to one with a better view for his social media photos. "I'm an influencer," he announced to the increasingly frustrated hotel staff. "Do you know how many followers I have? One bad review from me could cost you thousands in bookings." The hotel manager, Emma Watson, no relation to the actress, as she often had to explain, handled the situation with practiced grace. "Mr. Chen, we're happy to accommodate any reasonable requests, but perhaps you'd like to settle in first. London's quite lovely this time of year, and there's so much to see." Marcus scoffed, already planning his next video. "Oh, I'll see it all right. I'm going to show my followers what this city really is, overrated and stuck in the past." As he unpacked his expensive luggage, Marcus pulled out his filming equipment. He had specially packed water bottles, props, and even a few costume changes for the videos he planned to make. His most anticipated target, the famous royal guards at Buckingham Palace. "These guys think they're so special with their funny hats and serious faces," he said to his phone camera. "Tomorrow, we're going to see just how professional they really are. Stay tuned, followers, this is going to be epic." That evening, as London's summer sun slowly set, Marcus sat in his hotel room, meticulously planning the next day's activities. On his laptop screen, he watched videos of other tourists interacting with the royal guards, but in his mind, he was already crafting ways to make his video more extreme, more viral-worthy. Little did Marcus Chen know that his arrogance was about to lead him down a path that would change his entire perspective, and not in the way he had planned. As he finally went to bed, the city of London continued its eternal rhythm outside his window, indifferent to the presence of one more tourist who thought he could disrespect centuries of tradition without consequences. Tomorrow would be a day that Marcus Chen would never forget, though not for the reasons he imagined. The next morning dawned bright and unusually hot for London. Marcus Chen emerged from his hotel at 9 a.m. sharp, dressed in what he considered tourist casual, though his outfit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His camera equipment was ready, and his water bottles were filled, not for hydration but for what he called content creation. Good morning, followers, he announced to his phone camera as he walked towards Buckingham Palace. Today, we're going to make those famous guards crack. No one has ever managed to make them break character on camera, but your boy Marcus is about to change that. The streets were already filling with tourists, many carrying umbrellas for shade against the unusually strong sun. Marcus pushed his way through the crowds, ignoring the disapproving looks from those he shoved aside. A young mother had to pull her child out of his path as he marched forward, focused only on his phone screen. At Buckingham Palace, the scene was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Two royal guards stood at their posts, resplendent in their traditional red uniforms and bearskin hats. Despite the rising temperature, they remained perfectly still, embodying centuries of discipline and tradition. "Look at these guys," Marcus whispered to his camera, "all dressed up like toy soldiers. Must be dying in this heat. Let's have some fun." The crowd around the guards was respectful, maintaining the required distance and taking photos quietly. Children pointed in wonder, and parents explained the significance of the guards to their little ones. But Marcus had other plans. He positioned himself near the guard on the right, a tall soldier named James Harrison, though Marcus didn't care to know his name or background. What Marcus didn't know was that James was a decorated veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before earning his place in the Queen's Guard. "Hey, Mr. Guard," Marcus called out, his phone recording. "Isn't it hot in that funny hat? Maybe you need some cooling off." He moved closer, ignoring the posted signs about maintaining distance from the guards. A nearby tour guide, Mary Thompson, noticed Marcus's behavior and stepped forward. "Sir, please respect the distance. These guards are active duty soldiers, not tourist attractions." Marcus turned his camera to Mary. "Look, followers, the fun police is here. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. These guys are just actors in costumes, right?" Several tourists backed away, sensing trouble. An elderly British couple shook their heads in disapproval, while a group of American teenagers watched with embarrassment, ashamed that their countryman was behaving so poorly. "Last warning, sir," called out a police officer who had noticed the commotion. "Step back from the guard." But Marcus was too invested in his content to listen. He began a series of increasingly aggressive attempts to provoke a reaction. He waved his hands in front of the guard's face, made silly faces, and even attempted to mimic the guard's stance in a mocking way. The temperature continued to rise, both literally and figuratively. Sweat beaded on James's forehead under his bearskin hat, but he remained stoic, as his training demanded. The crowd had grown larger now, but not to watch Marcus's antics. They were concerned about what might happen next. "Come on, man," Marcus taunted, his voice getting louder. "How much do they pay you to stand here like a statue? In America, we actually work for our money." A small group of British schoolchildren on a field trip watched wide-eyed as their teacher tried to hurry them away from the scene. One little girl tugged at her teacher's sleeve and whispered, "Why is that man being so mean?" Marcus, growing frustrated at the guard's continued professionalism, reached for one of his water bottles. The summer heat had made him irritable, and his determination to get his viral moment was overriding any remaining common sense. "All right, followers," he announced to his camera, "since our friend here isn't playing along, maybe it's time to help him cool down a bit. Let's see how well he maintains that famous discipline when—" He left the sentence hanging, building suspense for his audience. The police officer was already reaching for his radio, sensing what was about to happen. Other guards in the vicinity had been quietly alerted through their communication systems. The stage was set for what would become one of the most regrettable moments of Marcus Chen's life, a moment that would soon transform his arrogant smile into desperate pleading. As he unscrewed the water bottle cap, he remained completely oblivious to the severity of what he was about to do. The clock struck 10:30 a.m., and London held its breath for what would happen next. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus Chen lifted the water bottle above his head. The crowd around him collectively held their breath, some people instinctively. "Watch this, followers," Marcus announced with a smirk. "Let's see if these famous guards are waterproof." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus flung the contents of his water bottle directly at guard James Harrison. The water arsed through the air, catching the summer sunlight before splashing across the guard's immaculate red uniform and bearskin hat. For a split second, absolute silence fell over the crowd. Even the ever-present London traffic seemed to fade away. Water dripped down James's uniform, darkening the bright red fabric and running in streams down his face. Then everything happened at once. A sharp whistle pierced the air. Within seconds, 2 additional royal guards appeared, moving with practiced precision. Their boots clicked against the pavement in perfect unison, the sound echoing off the palace walls. These weren't the ceremonial movements tourists usually witnessed. This was military efficiency in action. Simultaneously, 3 police officers converged on the scene. The one who had warned Marcus earlier was already speaking into his radio. Code 27 at Gate Alpha. Subject in custody, requesting immediate backup. Marcus's cocky smile vanished as quickly as his social media dreams. His phone slipped from his suddenly trembling hands, clattering to the ground as one officer firmly gripped his arm. What? Hey, come on. It was just a joke. Marcus's voice cracked, his earlier bravado evaporating like the water droplets now falling from the guard's uniform. I'm an American citizen. You can't. Sir, you are under arrest for assaulting a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, the officer stated firmly, already reaching for his handcuffs. This is a serious offense under British law. The crowd that had gathered was no longer silent. Phones recorded from every angle as Marcus Chen, self-proclaimed influencer and proud provocateur, was firmly secured in handcuffs. Some people applauded, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Guard James Harrison remained at his post, as protocol demanded, but 2 other guards quickly arrived with towels and a replacement uniform. The efficiency of their response made it clear this wasn't the first time they dealt with such incidents, though perhaps none quite as brazen. You don't understand, Marcus pleaded, his voice rising in panic. I have 500,000 followers. This was supposed to go viral. Oh, it'll go viral all right, muttered someone in the crowd, just not the way you planned. A senior palace security official had arrived on the scene, his face grave as he surveyed the situation. He spoke quietly with the police officers while examining the footage from the palace's security cameras. Marcus's expensive designer shoes scuffed against the pavement as reality began to sink in. His face, usually so confident and smug for his social media posts, had drained of all color. The heat from the summer sun now felt oppressive, and sweat began to bead on his forehead. Please, he said, his voice barely a whisper now. I'll delete the video. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. But the machinery of British law enforcement was already in motion. A police van had arrived, its blue lights flashing silently in the morning sun. 2 more officers emerged, already reviewing the incident report on their tablets. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, their cameras still recording every moment of Marcus's humiliation. Some were already posting the videos online, where they would soon spread across the same social media platforms he had hoped to conquer. Sir, you'll be transported to the station now, one officer informed him. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to legal representation. Anything you say can and will be used as evidence. As they led him toward the police van, Marcus looked back one last time at Guard Harrison, who stood as straight and dignified as ever, despite his wet uniform. In that moment, Marcus finally understood the profound difference between social media spectacle and real-world consequences. The police van's doors closed with a heavy thud, and Marcus Chen, who had arrived in London less than 24 hours ago full of arrogance and disrespect, sat alone on the hard bench, his hands cuffed and his head bowed. Outside, life at Buckingham Palace quickly returned to normal. Tourists resumed their photos, guards continued their duties, and the summer sun continued to shine. But for Marcus, this was just the beginning of what would become the most humbling experience of his life. And somewhere in the digital ether, his phone lay forgotten on the ground, still recording, capturing nothing but the sky above London and the sounds of his world crashing down around him. Inside the police station, Marcus Chen sat in an interview room, his designer clothes now wrinkled and his confident demeanor completely shattered. The room was small and stark, with only a metal table, 3 chairs, and a conspicuous security camera in the corner. The air conditioning hummed quietly, a sharp contrast to the summer heat outside. Mr. Chen, Detective Sarah Matthews began, placing a folder on the table. Do you understand why you're here? Marcus nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on his hands which were trembling slightly. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in, and it was far worse than he had imagined. For the record, Please respond verbally. Detective Matthews continued, her voice professional but stern. Yes, Marcus croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand. The detective opened her folder, revealing printouts of Marcus's social media posts from the previous day and that morning. We've reviewed your social media accounts, Mr. Chen. It appears this wasn't a spontaneous act, was it? You planned this. Marcus's face paled even further. His earlier posts about teaching the guards a lesson and making the best viral content ever now seemed incredibly foolish and incriminating. Your actions today constitute several serious offenses, Detective Matthews explained. Assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard, disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, and premeditated harassment of military personnel on active duty. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another officer entered with a tablet, showing rapidly spreading videos of the incident. Marcus's humiliation was already going viral, but not in the way he had hoped. The headlines were scathing. Arrogant tourist gets instant justice, and social media influencer faces serious charges in London. Please, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I'll delete everything. I'll make a public apology. I have money. I can pay whatever fine you want. Detective Matthews looked at him steadily. Mr. Chen, this isn't about money. The Queen's Guard isn't just a tourist attraction. These are highly trained military personnel with distinguished service records. The guard you assaulted, James Harrison, is a decorated veteran. This information hit Marcus like a physical blow. He slumped in his chair, the full weight of his actions crushing down on him. Your passport has been temporarily confiscated, the detective continued. You'll need to appear before a magistrate tomorrow morning. Until then, you'll be held in custody. Custody? Marcus's voice rose in panic. You mean jail? No, please. I can't go to jail. What about my hotel? My things? My followers? Your hotel has been notified, and your belongings will be secured, Detective Matthews replied. As for your social media followers, I imagine they're getting quite a different show than what you intended. A young officer entered with paperwork for Marcus to sign. As he read through the documents with trembling hands, his phone would have been buzzing nonstop if it hadn't been logged into evidence. Notifications of thousands of new comments, most of them expressing shock and disgust at his behavior. One more thing, Detective Matthews added, pulling out another document. The palace is considering pursuing additional civil charges for damaging a ceremonial uniform. The cost of these uniforms is substantial. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw the potential financial figures. His tech money suddenly didn't seem so impressive. As he was led to a holding cell, Marcus caught his reflection in a window. Gone was the arrogant influencer who had arrived in London yesterday. In his place was a scared, disheveled man who had learned the hard way that real life doesn't care about social media fame. The cell door closed with a heavy clang, and Marcus sat on the simple bed, his head in his hands. Through the small window, you could see the London sky turning orange as evening approached. Somewhere out there, Guard Harrison would be finishing his shift with dignity intact, while Marcus's reputation was being destroyed by his own actions. A guard brought him a basic meal and some water, not the five-star hotel service he'd expected from his London trip. As he picked at the food, Marcus thought about how quickly everything had fallen apart. Tomorrow he would face a magistrate, but for now, all he could do was sit in his cell and reflect on how his quest for viral fame had led to the most humiliating day of his life. And still, the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Marcus Chen stood nervously in the holding area of Westminster Magistrates' Court. His once pristine suit was wrinkled from spending the night in a cell, and dark circles under his eyes revealed his sleepless night. A court-appointed solicitor, Mr. Thompson, stood beside him, reviewing the case details one final time. The magistrate today is Mrs. Eleanor Bennet, Mr. Thompson explained quietly. She's known for being fair but strict, especially in cases involving disrespect to British institutions. He paused, studying Marcus's anxious face. When you speak to her, be humble and honest. Your social media history isn't doing you any favors. Marcus nodded weakly. During the night, his temporary replacement phone had been flooded with messages from his family in America. His mother's disappointed texts hurt more than any legal punishment could. All rise, called the court officer as Magistrate Bennet entered the courtroom. Marcus's knees felt weak as he stood, and he gripped the defendant's podium for support. The prosecution presented their case first. The evidence was overwhelming. Palace security footage, hundreds of tourist videos, Marcus's own social media posts planning the incident, and a formal statement from the palace. When they played the video of him splashing the water, Marcus couldn't bear to watch. The sound of his own arrogant laughter made him wince. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "this was not a momentary lapse in judgment. Mr. Chen planned this attack, boasted about it online, and showed complete disregard for both our laws and our traditions." When it was his turn to speak, Marcus's voice trembled. "Your Honor, he stopped, swallowed hard, and to everyone's surprise, tears began rolling down his cheeks. The same man who had been so arrogant just 24 hours ago was now literally breaking down in court. "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice cracking. "I was stupid and disrespectful. I thought everything was just content for my followers. I didn't think about the real people involved." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, not caring about appearances anymore. "Guard Harrison is a war veteran, and I treated him like a prop for my entertainment. I'm deeply ashamed." Magistrate Bennett listened intently, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was silent except for Marcus's occasional sniffles. Even the usual whispers and shuffling had ceased as everyone waited for her response. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice stern but not unkind, "what you did yesterday was not just an attack on one guard. It was an assault on centuries of tradition and the honor of Her Majesty's armed forces. Your actions showed a profound disrespect for our country and our values." Marcus's shoulders slumped further with each word. The magistrate continued, "However, your genuine remorse today works in your favor. I also note that you have no prior criminal record." She paused, reviewing the documents before her. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Marcus held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "Taking all factors into consideration, I sentence you to the following: a fine of £5,000, payable immediately, an additional £2,000 for the replacement of the ceremonial uniform. You'll write a formal letter of apology to Guard Harrison and the palace. Your tourist visa will be restricted, requiring you to leave the United Kingdom within 48 hours. Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. It wasn't jail time, but it was still a severe punishment that would impact him significantly. Furthermore, the magistrate added, fixing him with a stern gaze, "You will post a public apology on all your social media platforms, acknowledging your misconduct and the respect due to military personnel. This post must remain pinned at the top of your profiles for 6 months." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The social media fame he had sought would now be used for his public humiliation. As he was led out of the courtroom, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in a window again. The tears had left trails on his cheeks, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his carefully styled hair was a mess. But for the first time since arriving in London, he saw himself clearly, not as an influencer, not as a prankster, but as someone who had needed this harsh lesson in humility. Outside the courtroom, Mr. Thompson handed him back his regular phone. "I suggest you start drafting that apology post," he said quietly. "And Mr. Chen, perhaps consider a different kind of content for your future social media presence." Marcus nodded silently, knowing that part 6 of his ordeal, facing his online audience, would be its own kind of punishment. Back in his hotel room, Marcus Chen sat at the desk, staring at his phone screen. The court-ordered public apology needed to be posted, but every time he started typing, he deleted it all and began again. His hands were shaking slightly as notification after notification kept popping up on his screen. The story had exploded online. Hashtag arrogant tourists was trending, and news websites worldwide had picked up the story. His follower count was actually increasing, but not for the reasons he'd wanted. People were following just to watch his downfall. "Dear followers," he typed for the 10th time, then paused. The old Marcus would have tried to spin this to make it somehow seem cool or funny. But that Marcus had died in a holding cell last night. Finally, he began typing his genuine thoughts. "Yesterday, I committed an inexcusable act of disrespect against Guard James Harrison, a decorated military veteran serving in the Queen's Guard. My behavior was shameful, arrogant, and wrong. I have been rightfully punished by British courts and will be leaving the UK in disgrace. To Guard Harrison, the Royal Guard, and the British people, I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies." He added a photo of himself outside the courthouse, looking properly humbled, and hit post before he could change his mind. The reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Most people continued to criticize him, but some appreciated his straightforward admission of guilt. His sponsorship deals, however, began disappearing one by one. Email notifications showed companies terminating their contracts, wanting nothing to do with his tarnished reputation. A knock at his door startled him. It was Mr. Thompson, his solicitor, with paperwork for the fine payment and another envelope. "This just arrived from the palace," Mr. Thompson said, handing him the envelope. "They're expecting your written apology by tomorrow morning. Also, your flight has been booked for tomorrow evening. The visa restrictions require you to leave within 48 hours, remember." Marcus opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal letter detailing the proper format for his apology to Guard Harrison, along with a reminder of the ceremonial uniform's replacement cost. As he sat down to write the formal apology, Marcus found himself researching Guard Harrison's military service record, which was public information. The more he read, the worse he felt. The man he had treated as a prop had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, earned several medals for bravery, and now considered guarding the palace a supreme honor. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his boss back in Silicon Valley. The message was brief. "We need to talk about your position when you return." Marcus put his head in his hands. In just 2 days, he had managed to destroy a career and reputation that had taken years to build. His tech job, his influencer status, his sponsorships, everything was crumbling because of one arrogant decision. The formal apology took him hours to write. Every word had to be perfect, genuine, and respectful. He wrote about his shame, his understanding of the gravity of his actions, and his newfound respect for the institution he had mocked. As evening fell over London, Marcus packed his bags. His expensive clothes seemed meaningless now. He picked up his phone one last time and did something he'd never done before. He turned off all social media notifications. A final email arrived from the palace confirming the receipt of his fine payment. The total amount, including the uniform replacement, had wiped out most of his savings. His fun trip to London had cost him nearly everything. Looking out his hotel window at the darkening London sky, Marcus thought about Guard Harrison, still standing at his post with unwavering dignity. He thought about how his own parents would react when he returned home in disgrace. He thought about all the young followers who had watched his disrespectful behavior and hoped they would learn from his mistake. Tomorrow, he would board a flight back to America, but he wouldn't be the same person who had arrived in London so arrogantly just days ago. The city had taught him a harsh but necessary lesson about respect, tradition, and the real consequences of treating life like a social media game. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from his mother. "Coming to pick you up at the airport tomorrow. We need to talk about your future." Marcus turned off the lights in his hotel room, but sleep wouldn't come easily. Part 7 of this story, returning home and rebuilding his life, would be the longest and hardest chapter yet. 1 year later, Marcus Chen stood at the front of a university auditorium, facing a room full of students. He looked different now. Gone were the designer clothes and carefully styled hair. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt and carried himself with a quiet humility that would have been unrecognizable to his former self. "Social media isn't real life," he began, clicking to a photo of himself from that fateful day in London. "And sometimes it takes losing everything to learn what really matters." The students listened intently as Marcus shared his story. After returning from London in disgrace, he had indeed lost his tech job. His influencer career had imploded, and his savings had been depleted by the fines. Moving back in with his parents at 32 had been the final blow to his ego. "But hitting rock bottom taught me something valuable," Marcus continued, showing the next slide, a screenshot of his viral court-ordered apology. "It taught me about respect, humility, and the difference between digital fame and real honor." In the months following his return, Marcus had done some serious soul-searching. He'd started volunteering at veterans organizations, learning about military service and developing genuine respect for those who served. He'd even managed to make contact with Guard Harrison through proper channels, sending a personal letter of apology beyond the court-ordered one. To his surprise, Harrison had responded with a brief but dignified note, accepting his apology and encouraging him to learn from the experience. That letter now hung framed in Marcus's modest apartment, a reminder of both his lowest moment and the beginning of his redemption. Today, I work as a social media ethics consultant, Marcus explained to the students. I help companies and influencers understand the real-world impact of their online actions. The same platforms I once used to disrespect others, I now use to teach responsibility and cultural sensitivity. His new career had started small, speaking at local schools about the dangers of social media fame-seeking. Gradually, his honest account of his downfall and subsequent growth had attracted attention from organizations wanting to address toxic online behavior. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had finally achieved genuine influence by talking about how his pursuit of artificial influence had destroyed him. The royal guard I disrespected that day. Marcus clicked to a new slide showing Guard Harrison in his full ceremonial uniform. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, saved fellow soldiers' lives, and considered guarding Buckingham Palace the highest honor. I treated him like a prop for my entertainment, but he showed more dignity in his silence than I had shown in my entire online career. Marcus's mother sat in the back of the auditorium, watching her son with quiet pride. The past year had been difficult, but she had seen him transform from an arrogant social media star into a thoughtful, humble man who wanted to make a real difference. After the lecture, a student approached him. "But don't you miss having all those followers? The fame?" Marcus smiled gently. "I have fewer followers now, but more real connections. My current social media shows who I really am, someone trying to help others avoid my mistakes. That's worth more than any number of likes or shares." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder about tomorrow's meeting with a major tech company wanting his input on their youth engagement policies. His new work wasn't as flashy as his influencer days, but it was meaningful. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his small home office, updating his presentation for tomorrow. On his wall hung 3 frames: the court documents from London, Guard Harrison's response letter, and his first speaking engagement flyer. Together, they told the story of his fall and redemption. He opened his social media account, now used solely for sharing educational content about online responsibility, and posted a simple message. "1 year ago today, I learned the hard way that respect isn't something you can buy with money or followers. Sometimes your greatest failures become your greatest teachers." As he got ready for bed, Marcus caught his reflection in the mirror. The arrogant tourist who had splashed water on a royal guard was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned the true meaning of respect, dignity, and redemption. His last thought before falling asleep was of Guard Harrison, still standing proud at his post in London, unchanged by the social media circus that had surrounded him that day. In the end, it was the guard's unwavering dignity that had helped change Marcus's life forever. The story of the arrogant tourist had become a tale of transformation, proving that sometimes the biggest falls can lead to the most meaningful rises.